If you spend a lot of time on the U City Square campus, you may have encountered Stephanie Fenner before. She is at the front desk, sometimes working as the CIC concierge, and she also painted a mural on the second floor of Quorum, which she's going to talk about as well. So I'm really excited to get a look inside of her studio and talk to her about her artistic practice. So now I'd like to welcome our guest, Stephanie Fenner. Hey, Stephanie, how are you?
Thanks, Angela.
Sure.
I see Angela a lot at 3675 Market, so I was super excited to be invited to do one of these. This would be the second Venture Cafe panel or event that I participated in, thanks to Angela. So
yeah, we also did a placemaking discussion because you did this mural at Quorum. So
yes, yeah. So just a quick background on me before I dive into a little presentation of some of my work. I've been in Philly for almost 4 years now. I'm originally from Michigan. You'll see like that theme of the Midwest kind of pop up a lot in my work, so I think it's important just to note that. I moved here to attend grad school at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, PAFA, and I graduated there in 2018. And then shortly after, I started working at CIC as one of the concierge in the lobby, and I have been provided great opportunities like meeting Angela, being commissioned to paint the mural on the second floor. So I will just dive right into it. Let me share my screen. Okay, let's see. So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll show a picture of my mural at the end. I didn't totally include it in this presentation just because, as you'll see, the bulk of my work is oil paintings right now. I have worked in several different media before, so the mural was definitely something new and exciting that I got to delve into, but I'll kind of touch on that in a little bit. But so this is the first painting I'm showing. It's called Sleep Seeing. It's 40 inches by 48 inches, and it's oil on panel, and it's the last painting that I made at PAFA at grad school. And I like showing this one first because it's sort of something that I feel like encompasses a lot of the thoughts I have in my studio practice. A lot of what I work with is ideas about storytelling and creating these sort of fictional narratives that combine different worlds. And I'll get more into that in a couple of the other paintings. Whoops, sorry. This is just an installation view, so you can kind of see the scale of that painting. This is at 1969 Gallery in New York. This was a show that was put up maybe a couple months after I graduated. So this piece is one that I made maybe like a year and a half ago, and it still sort of resonates with what I'm doing now. It's called All in Green Went My Love Riding, after E.E. It's after an E.E. Cummings poem. But I'm just going to read really quickly what it says. This is sort of when I started incorporating a lot more of my own writing into my paintings and thinking of it as the words as objects and less about the words themselves, but sort of leaving these little messages or breadcrumbs throughout the work. So it says, never have I felt more complete than when tiptoeing through woods with death at my feet. My great-grandfather's rifle felt heavy in my hands. I wanted to make my father proud, my grandfather, my Nana, and my uncles proud. Silent hunters sleepwalking through darkening labyrinths of trees and shadows. Though even with the weight of Midwestern generations bearing down on me, the weight of my great-grandfather's rifle, I still felt more like my hunted deer than anyone I had been before the forest. So I'll just like kind of explain that for a second because it sort of unpacks all the rest of my work. I feel like my upbringing sort of led me to have this collection of really strong traditions and rituals that are seated in like layers of family connections. And I feel like growing up, I was really tied to that, and that being sort of a story that built who I was. But then there was this very specific moment where I went hunting for the first time with my dad and my grandpa and my great uncles. And I felt like I more so belonged in the histories of the nature around me. And I felt like I would never have been able to shoot the deer that was in front of me. So it's really been this combination of those two ways of thinking and trying to make new narratives and new stories and new rituals around that. So this is called Amidst the Mists. It's another one where I was thinking of writing as sort of leaving these little like pinned messages as sort of like afterthoughts in the paintings. This one is about 2 feet by 2 feet big. This one's titled Milk in the Cauldron. This one is 14 by 18 and it's hanging in my studio right now, so you'll see it. It's one that I felt was like the last painting I made where I was really satisfied with the paint handling and the paint quality. It's oil on canvas, and this was made maybe a year and a half ago, and I've made paintings since then, but this is the last one where I really felt like I was getting the sort of colors and quality of paint that I wanted. So the next pieces I'm going to show you are a step away from oil painting. I sort of like abruptly stopped painting for a bit. This is maybe last fall. And so I moved directly to just drawing. When I first started making art, I was mostly working with charcoal and drawing. So I kind of went back to my roots with that. This is called North of Just Right. And it's pretty big. It's like 30 by 24, I think. It's just charcoal on paper. And then also last fall, I started experimenting with making my own paint and my own inks. So at the bottom here, it's sort of hard to tell over Zoom, but this bottom area here is made with walnut ink. That was a gift to me from one of my friends. So kind of around this time, I started collecting my own things to make ink out of, experimenting a little bit with what I could do with that material and seeing how it would really transform my studio practice. And it turns out that it really has to this point. This is another one where I was sort of just playing around with what I was making. I didn't really know how it would work coming from purely oil painting with paint out of the tube. I didn't really know how I could get the same effect in my previous paintings in this new work. So this is called City Children. It's about all the stray cats in my neighborhood. And it's charcoal and acorn ink. It's made by simmering acorns on the stove, and then that's what you paint with. So the ink is the sort of stems of wheat coming out, and there's charcoal brushed over it, and so it made this like really cool resist effect. This next one is also on my studio wall still. It's called Waiting for Sirens, and it is 48 by 36 inches long, and it's charcoal on paper. So again, just going back to just drawing and keeping it very simple in that as I'm searching for new colors.
Would you say that the deer that you're depicting here kind of goes back to your childhood hunting experiences?
Yeah, definitely. So let me jump back. So in this one, I started painting these deer with these sort of like glowing orb lights. And I was thinking of these like sort of spirit guides or dream guides, like something that's very tied to me personally, but that sort of are like a stand-in. So that's why the figure in this one sort of has like something over her eyes as the deer are like leading her through the woods, so to speak. So yeah, definitely I'm like relating it back to that sort of childhood experience. It all goes back to that one memory of hunting with my dad and realizing these two different worlds that I was trying to bridge together.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll see that one later on my wall as I just finished it. So it's kind of been one of those stages where I'm like, is it done? This next one is also still in my studio. I thought it was done, but now I'm feeling like I want to paint on it again. This is a pretty big one. You can actually see it behind me. But it's 3 feet by 3 feet. It's called Cover What I Can Grow. And this is the first one that I tried painting totally in my own handmade oil paints. And as you can see, I didn't have a lot of colors at this time. So it was pretty frustrating to not have the readiness of color that just comes out of a tube. So the white in the painting is still tubed oil paint. But the reddish orange comes from ground brick from the alleyway right by my house. So that was like a good start. So I think now that I've got a couple more colors in my palette, I might go back into it and paint on that again. This one was really exciting for me. This is called Portrait with Ferns, and it's just something I did in a sketchbook. It's I think like 14 by 17. But I took a trip to the Wissahickon hiking trail and collected all these stones from the Schuylkill River with my friend. And the green in this painting is ground chlorite, which it makes this like gorgeous earth sap green. When it's in the water, it looks kind of like turquoise. And then the black in the painting is coal, which was a huge success for me. They were so rich and pigmented that this was like really important. So I ended up turning both of those colors into little watercolors that I can show you later too. And then the last painting that I wanted to show, this is called Creek, like a creaky door. I was laughing earlier because I said creek and I was like, not like a river. But this, I don't love this painting, but this is the first painting that I did that is 100% handmade oil paint. So it really gave me an idea of what I was doing material wise, and how the paint moves and how it's different than what I'm used to working with. So that's sort of the direction that I'm headed now. Really quick, if I can figure out, I just want to show you guys the mural that I made really quick. It's different than everything in this presentation for a reason. And the experience that I have from it sort of comes from installation rooms I've done in the past, where I've painted on whole walls and everything. So, oh, here it is. Can you see my screen still?
There's like a weird glitch on my end. I don't know if anyone else can see it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's glitching on mine.
Oh, it says sharing is pause. Bring your window to the front. Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe I'll just find a way to share the mural afterwards, but.
We have a couple comments in here,
Sure.
a lot of compliments on your work. One comment from Ryan, he says, the text that is painted in each piece is very interesting. It's interesting to see its visibility or lack of visibility. And I also have a comment on that. I feel like not only is text visible or like hidden, but also you are the subject of a lot of your drawings. And I feel like you hide your face a lot as well. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've ended up noticing retroactively after I've had like a collection of them. And I'm like, oh, my face is sort of like obscured in a lot of them. I think it sort of goes back to that first painting that I shared where the figure, which is me, is sort of sleepwalking. I'm thinking it's like navigating these different worlds and these different narratives at the same time, and using those sort of the deer or the different rituals as ways to navigate it instead of having like your eyesight. But I think for the most part, I don't know if I was consciously choosing to do that other than that reason.
Yeah, it's interesting. We also have another question. How did you get the deer to pose for you?
For the first painting I did, the references I used were actually from my dad's trail cam. So my dad is very helpful.
What is that? I don't know what a trail
cam is. It's just a camera. So it's just a camera that you put up in your like spot that you go hunting. And so you can see like the different deer's patterns. Some people like leave feed out for them. But it's a really cool way to see like forest life at night. If you search trail cam photos or videos, there's a lot of like, they look like horror movie things because it's all in that like green light. But when I was making that painting, I also made a video that went with it. And so I wanted those trail cam photos. So that's where a lot of that content comes from. So I'm always messaging them like, you been to the woods?
I actually did take a look at your video work while I was kind of researching your work for this. So I'd love if you wanted to share some of those pieces later as well. I don't know if we have time for all that, but.
Oh yeah, if we have time, I will see if I can find some. I'll try, I can find the deer one. It's pretty short. Yeah, I think I said earlier, like I've worked in a lot of mediums. In school particularly, I spent a good deal amount of time on video work.
Yeah.
So they've all sort of informed everything I do. So it's definitely something that I would go back to if I had the facilities for again.
Does anyone have any questions for Stephanie before we move on?
Do you have a favorite medium?
That's a good question. I would say I have a favorite medium until I use a different medium and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite. Like when I switched from oil painting back to charcoal, I hadn't worked in charcoal in probably like 2 years maybe. And I was like, oh my God, I miss my fingers being smudgy. I miss everything being so easy to just like erase. So I don't know, maybe charcoal, maybe drawing, just because it's so tactile and it's immediate. Plus I've always been kind of self-taught oil painting, so I've never felt like as confident with that. But yeah, I don't know if I'd be like confident in saying that that's my favorite. They're all great.
On that note, I'm wondering, you mentioned you make a lot of your own oil pigments. Do you also make your own charcoal?
No, I haven't yet. I've seen that you could.
Yeah.
My only thing is I don't have a fire.
Yeah, that's understandable. We had an artist, a studio tour a while back with Cindy Stockton Moore, who kind of demonstrated. Yeah, you guys should connect at some point because she makes her own supplies as well, and she kind of gets like little, I guess, branches or vines and puts them inside of a tin and then cooks them on the fire, and they apparently make like great charcoal.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely how I've seen it done. If I'm ever like back in rural Michigan by a campfire, I'll probably try that out.
Yeah. So Ryan has a comment. I'll just read the whole comment. The text more engages a partial story that I finished with the visual image. I like the way this interaction makes me engage with the work, reading, but it's very painterly text. Does the text precede the image or the other way?
It's the text first, usually. I guess in the case of the one that's like the whole page, that's a page from my journal, like my diary. So generally it's the text that precedes the image. And a lot of my paintings, even if they don't have actual text in them, they'll usually come from like a line of text that I'll just be thinking about, that I can't stop thinking about. So I'll jot that down and then an image will come from that. So I think the Waiting for Sirens one, that's one that where like I thought of the idea of waiting for sirens and then the image came after. That was a good question. Thank you.
And then why did you have this sudden like period of time where you stopped oil painting and moved to charcoal?
So I was mixing up all these like elaborate palettes. It goes back to my like not really being formally trained in oil paint. So I would just kind of mix until I got the color I wanted. And I felt like I was creating all this waste. When I talk about like making my own materials and all that, I think sustainability is a huge part of that, but I don't want to pretend that I'm 100% sustainable in my studio. So it's not the bulk of it. But when I was making these palettes, I felt like I would put the paint down, be unhappy about it, scrape the paint off, maybe smear it onto another canvas, and essentially just waste all this paint. So it was a way for me to sort of pull back a little bit, narrow my palette down so that I didn't have the options to do all of that. And in the long run, like looking back on it and why I've stuck with it, it's really sort of made me slow down in my process a lot and made me a lot happier with the paintings I'm making, instead of making a quick one, deciding, oh, it's done, and then feeling a month later like, oh, I could paint over that, you know?
Mm-hmm. I also just want to add that I am formally trained in oil painting, and I feel like I also just mix colors together to see what comes out. So I don't know like what kind of formal training you really need. Do these natural pigments you're making, do they have like, do you know anything about their archival quality? Like, do they change over time? Have you noticed so far?
So I haven't noticed any so far, but that's definitely a factor. There are a lot of ones, like if it's kind of becoming trendy right now. So if you see like how to make avocado dye at home, which I have avocados in my freezer to do that, but those sort of things will get put under this category of fugitive inks, meaning that they'll probably fade to nothing over time. But a lot of commercial watercolors or gouache will do the same thing if you don't seal the, if you don't seal the drawing correctly. One thing that I've looked into or have sort of found out is that the binder that you put them in is what adheres them to the paper. And so in theory is what should suspend them longer. So I've gone from just doing inks where it's just essentially the pigment in water, and that's probably less archival, to using gum arabic binder that is more like a gouache or an acrylic paint, like a plasticky paint. And that adheres it to the paper and seals it. And then if you're using an oil-based binder, that'll seal it as well. It's basically just whatever the pigment is suspended in, that's what's going to give it the longevity. But I think if I were to have something on paper and still have the ink on it, I would probably do like some UV protection spray or something.
Okay, cool. So I'd love to learn more about all of these pigment making processes you have, and also see your studio. Does anyone have any other questions before we start doing that? Okay, how the physicality of the inks or process of making them play into the process of making? Does it give the work a dynamic before a mark is made?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's something that I missed sort of pointing at earlier, is the first time I tried making my own pigments. It was after I took a trip home to Michigan, and I ended up going up north, up to the Upper Peninsula, on Lake Michigan at my grandparents' house. And I made my sister and my mom collect rocks with me, and I sort of like turned it into an artist residency. And I like got home and I had a book on like Michigan rocks, and I sorted them all. And then I realized that most Michigan rocks were made out of like granite and quartz and are really hard to break. But it was mostly the tie of collecting them myself in Lake Michigan, on a lake where I've grown up my entire life. The same thing with collecting them from the Schuylkill River, like places that are tied to certain ideas of home or places of origin. Like even the brick from the alley by this house, I collected it because we're moving soon, so I wanted something to sort of commemorate my time here. So I think that always goes into it. I don't know if that's something that is ever noticeable to anyone but me, but I think that gives it a higher quality when I'm making it.
Cool.
Should we see the studio?
Yeah, let's see what you have going on.
Okay, cool. Let me unplug here. So when I graduated school, I lived here for about a year, and I moved from my like nice big grad school studio where I could make a mess to a home studio, but I was lucky enough we weren't using this front part of our house. So I sort of commandeered it for my own studio. I'm just gonna.
So remind me again, you're in Philly. What part of Philadelphia do you live in?
I'm in South Philly. So I'm in like Point Breeze, in between Point Breeze and Grays Ferry. And we're moving in like a month to the same exact street, but on 10th Street. So it's kind of funny.
Oh.
It's like a little baby street too. So it's weird that that's where we found, but I'm just going to back up so you can kind of see the whole thing, but there's my cat in the window.
Aw.
But this is my sort of in progress wall. I'll spin around so I'm not doing this. Oops, that's my hair. This is where I'm generally working on this wall. This is that large drawing that I was talking about. And then usually I like to keep a few either also in progress or other paintings that I feel like are in conversation with what I'm working on, just so I've remembered, you know, where I've been and like where I want to go. So
we have a request to zoom in on that drawing.
Yes, here I come. Tell me how zoomed is zoomed in because I can't see.
I think that looks good to me. What do you think, Mel?
Is that Mel Delac?
Yeah.
I went to school with Mel. Hi, Mel.
And Mel also asks, what artists are you currently influenced by?
Oh, okay. Right now, I think my biggest influence is Aubrey Leventhal. She was a teacher at PAFA, and she's just a great painter. And so I'm like wholeheartedly just staring at her work all the time.
I also feel like that question, like I will ask, can you extend that? Are you influenced by any like writers or music or movies or anything as well?
Yeah, I have a weird thing with movies in my studio. I have like some favorites that just kind of set a vibe for me, and I'll usually just have them on, or I'll have the soundtracks on. And I won't even be watching them, but it's just kind of like setting the mood. The biggest one is The Village. M. Night Shyamalan's The Village.
Oh yeah,
like
I remember that movie.
Yeah.
Like set out in the woods, right?
Yeah. Maybe it's a little too straightforward, but mostly now I'm just listening to the soundtrack to it. But it just sort of like sets this like eerie, moody tone for me.
Interesting.
But as far as reading goes, I'll admit I got a giant stack of books to read over quarantine, and I haven't finished one yet. But one of my favorites is Patti Smith. She writes a lot of books about writing, which I always find interesting because I feel like they're very similar to how artists work, the process of writing. So she's one of my favorites.
Yeah, she's great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll just spin around quickly, and then I can go to my like work table and do some demos. But here are a couple other like in progress ones that hang on, let me flip a light on. There we go.
So do you work on these in progress, like hanging on your wall like this?
Yeah, cool. Generally, or I'll be like down on my rug if I have to do something that's like with ink, and so it won't spill down. But usually, I think this one is the only exception because it's on paper. But if it was on a panel, I'd like bounce them around and switch which one was my focus for the day.
You're very organized. I'm looking behind you and you have like all of your paints like organized, hanging on the wall in rows.
It's taken a long time to like get that organized, and I feel like I have a lot of ideas for how I would change my studio at our new house. But yeah, that was like one of the first things I did when I moved my studio home. I was like, everything's gonna be color coordinated.
I need to do that. I have like a pile of paints, and then I'll find one sometimes and I'll be like, oh my God, I forgot I had this one. So
yeah, I have a whole box of like water-based paint, and I'm like, I didn't know I had these. I'm gonna use all of this. Yeah, it definitely makes it easier. But I will spin over. Actually, I'm gonna have my boyfriend hold my laptop so I can sort of have my hands free.
Hi.
My assistant.
What's your boyfriend's name?
His name is Ryan. He's the one asking the question.
Oh, hey, Ryan.
I'm grilling her. Sorry.
Okay. Just hold it down like that. Okay, cool. So this is kind of my work table. It's where I have all my pigments. It's where I have all my inks and my paints. And usually it's where I'll mix up a palette. If I'm painting on like a big painting, like the one on the wall, thank you, Ryan. Usually I'll mix an entire palette, and that takes maybe an hour to do. just so it's ready.
With oil paint, just to clarify to anyone who doesn't work in oil paint, how long does it take for a palette like that to dry?
If it were like regular oil paint, it's probably a couple days, maybe more. But with this oil paint, I would say maybe 3 days it's taken to get dry. And the good thing about making your own paint, let's say I'm gonna mix this up in a second, but if I mixed it up with I don't know, gum arabic, I could just add more and re-wet it and mix it again. It would just change the consistency. So it is pretty easy to sort of use that, especially if you're just mixing it with like water. But it's even easier if you're mixing it with something like walnut oil or linseed or something like that. But if I'm mixing up a thing of oil paint, I'll mix it with linseed oil first to sort of mull the painting. That's what this is called. And then if I want it to be thicker, I'll add cold wax medium, which is just like a kind of like a beeswax.
Is that like a powder, or is it like a wax?
It's like wax. It's like it kind of looks like petroleum Vaseline or something. So that gets it like good and chunky. It just makes it really matte and flat. I love all the angles you're giving, Ryan.
So are you about to give us a demonstration?
Yes. So I have a couple lined up. Are we okay on time?
We're doing great. And please, if anyone has any questions, just feel free to ask them or type them into the chat.
Right there. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to just show is the inks. Let me get a couple of them. They all kind of look the same, but I just keep my inks in mason jars. You put a whole clove, like spices, in them to keep them preserved so they don't get moldy. It's a living pigment, so there are days where I have to pick mold out of it and just kind of wipe it off. But it's always living, always growing.
Do you think after it's moldy, does that like does the mold like change it in any way? Does it make it better?
I don't think so. Okay. I haven't experimented with like growing the mold, but I'll let you know.
Okay.
What does change them are things called mordants. In dyeing, if you were dyeing fabric, a mordant is what adheres the color to a fabric. So that's just basically a metallic salt, something that's either acidic or alkaline. You add that to the dye and that'll alter the color, and it'll also make it adhere to fabric if you're doing that. So there are a couple, I'll show you some examples that I did last night that are in their regular form, and then I've added iron mordant to them. I have a copper one I'm working on, but it's not quite there. So iron is what it is. But I'm gonna try, is this light okay? Yeah, you can see, okay.
Yeah.
So here's a little example paper. I'll hold it like this. But these are just a couple of the different inks that I have. The really dark one is walnut ink. That's from my friend Sam. The one that I want to point out is this one. It doesn't really show up very well on Zoom, but it's a very light, like yellow green. And if you look at this bottom corner here, this is the same exact ink, but it's in lake pigment form, which I'll explain what that is. But I just want to show what the ink looks like in its regular state. It's this very light pink. So this comes from red chestnut tree blossoms. They're like the really pretty fuchsia flowers that are in bloom right now. To get the ink, you just simmer the blossoms on the stove until it gets the consistency that you want. You don't boil them. You just sort of like seep the color out. And then that's the ink. You throw some cloves in there. It's good to go. And so I thought I was getting this really pretty pink, this really vibrant like pink color. And when it dries, let me show you the one. It ends up looking like this green.
Wow, that's crazy.
I was like, what is this?
It looks sparkly too. Is that like, what is that like?
I'm not really sure why it's sparkly, to be honest.
Crystallized.
Yes,
yeah.
I think it's because I put a lot on there and that's just how it dried. This whole ink making process is the funnest part to me because it's very like, I don't know what's going to happen. So this sheet, for example, if I show this one again, this light brown color here, this is acorn cap, the little hats on acorns. This sort of dark bluish brown, that's acorn cap with iron mordant added to it.
Wow.
So iron saddens the color, it darkens it. And so that's where you get like a lot of your blues and a lot of your grays is from adding iron to it.
So Crystal had a question. Can you predict the color change when you add the mordant? I'm guessing no, you can't.
No, sometimes you can. You can sort of know that it's going to darken it, and it'll intensify the color. Sometimes I think I'm going to get a really nice color, and I just get another dark brown. I've gotten really good at getting browns, but there's one. Let me see if I can grab it. You don't have to video me jumping up here. Thanks for that video. This one is one that I did of avocado skins and onion skins. And you can see like all the different colors. It's all from that one ink, but I added iron at different stages. So
A really dark black.
yeah, it's purpley in person. It's like purple.
Okay.
And then this section here.
Looks glossy. It almost looks like it has a sheen on it.
Yeah, this section here I let dry really thick. It was kind of sticky before it dried. And then this part right here is like kind of a metallic-y green color. So when I first added the iron, I dropped it in there and they were dark green drops in this like normally light brown ink, which is crazy to me. So I thought I was gonna get a very dark green, which I think I have a full sheet of that. I think it's this one actually. So this is that same ink. This is the, oh, I'm kind of behind the light. This is the avocado skin and onion skin and iron.
Wow.
So
I never really thought of onion skin as having like a pigment, I guess.
oh yeah, and these are from yellow onions, but you can do red onions. You could do purple cabbage, but that's one of those really fugitive colors that'll fade, but it makes like a really, really bright purple.
So when you say you're using these, are you boiling the skins?
So you just want to simmer them,
Okay.
and you can simmer them for like a certain amount of time, but you don't really want to bring them to a boil because they'll burn the pigment and you'll just get a brown, which is what I'm certain I've done before, because it's like a learning process. But you can simmer them. You can add things like salt, like just table salt. You can add vinegar. That'll alter the color of something. So really it's just this huge experimental process. The problem I've run into is having enough of the like the dye stuff, the color, in order to experiment a lot. So whenever I find one that's like successful, I'm like, okay, I have to go back and get more of that. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that can go into it.
So basically you boil things to make ink and you grind things up to make oil paints.
Right. And basically the recipe to making paint is pigment and binder. So even the ink is you're boiling to get the pigment out. It's also, you can think of it as tannins, like tanning a hide. Something like acorns have a huge amount of natural tannins in them. So that makes a great natural dye. But that's all you're getting is the pigment, and then you can choose a binder. Like I could easily add gum arabic to this and it would change the consistency a little bit, but it's not perfect. But to solve that problem, there's something called lake pigments. And all of that is you're precipitating a liquid, something like this, and you're turning it into a solid, something like this. Can't really see that, but that's pigment.
We have a question from Mel. What other minerals, foods, materials are you planning on trying to collect for pigments?
Right now, I want more stones, more rocks. They're the easiest to process, and to me, they're the most exciting to find out what they are and where they come from. Like if you're looking for, like when I was trying to figure out what stones I got from the Schuylkill River, I was looking at the history of the area. So you'll find that there's like coal mines in the area, and that's where the stones carried down from. The ones that I found from Lake Michigan, there were certain quarries everywhere, and that was affecting what was being found in the lake. So I think that's kind of where I'm headed. It's tricky for me to sort of find those areas now because I'm not really familiar with Pennsylvania, but I think there's a lot of places that I'm ready to explore. Right now, since we've been in quarantine, it's mostly just been me pointing out weeds around my house and being like, what if I could make something from that?
Yeah,
Which
there's actually a New York-based artist named Ellie Irons who has a bunch of inks that she's made out of weeds that she's found in New York City.
Yeah, they can make great colors.
Yeah.
There's one, there's a purple, it's this one, the purple dead nettle, which you'd see everywhere. It kind of looks like a bunch of triangles on top of each other going from purple to green. It kind of made a disappointing ink, I'm not gonna lie. It was supposed to be very yellow-green, but it's kind of more like yellow-brown. But it did make a decent lake pigment. So I'm gonna show you this process in a second, and it's basically just turning a liquid into a solid. And the one that I'm going to turn is the red chestnut blossom. So Ryan's gonna get close, and you can see it immediately changed from this pink to this green.
Wow.
So this is like pigment that I've already processed from it. And I want more, so that's why I'm doing this. And it's very cool to see. I was like, wow, when it happened. So I have paper towels here. Yes, I have paper towels here because I've only done this once without successfully overflowing the thing. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But in the jar, I have the just the pink ink, just as is, just a little bit in there. I think if I do this again, I'll gather more of it and make it a little bit more intense, stronger. And then I have alum, which is aluminum potassium, I think, and it's dissolved in water here. This is the part where you're just adding the metallic salts to it. So this is a mordant, just like iron. It's kind of one of the more safer ones to use. And then this is washing soda, also known as potash or soda ash, but it's also dissolved in here. The alum might change the color of the ink slightly, and then the washing soda is what is gonna foam and bubble and make the solid pigment eventually.
So where do you buy all these materials?
Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, the alum used to be, and maybe still could be, bought in the kitchen spice aisle. It's used in cooking. I can show you. This is the one I bought for bulk purposes, but food grade. And then the washing soda is just a big bag. I forget what washing soda is used for. I think it's something like baking soda. It's an alkaline material, but it can cause burns. So normally I use gloves when I'm using it, if you're gonna do that at home at all. But you just dissolve both of them into water because they are a white powder, and they kind of get, they kind of look like sugar, hardened sugar, when you're trying to dissolve them. But you add the alum first, and I just kind of eyeball what I add. I probably should measure all this, but usually I'll do like 2 tablespoons of the powder in the water, and then I add the water until I think I'm gonna overflow the jar. It's very scientific. And you can also experiment with how much you're adding. So that was the alum I added, and you probably can't really see on video, but it darkened it a little bit. I think I have a jar. This is just the ink with the alum added that I just kept as ink. Filled it.
So
okay.
at what stage does it turn green?
Okay, so this is when it's going to turn green.
Okay.
It turns green when it's just the plain ink and it dries, which is crazy to me. I don't know why it does that. I don't know how it does that. I would love to learn why. And then it turns green now. So I'm going to add the washing soda now. And this is, if you see it overflow, I'm not panicked. It'll be fine. Oh, sorry.
Oh, wow.
So immediately turns green.
That's really interesting.
I'll add more. See, I always do this. I'm like, I can add more, and then then it like explodes.
And it
So
kind of
what
like
happens-
bubbles up.
Yeah, so what happens is you let this jar sit for maybe 3 to 4 days, and you'll see all of this start to settle to the bottom, and you'll just have clean water here. You can filter the water a couple times. I don't generally do that, but you could. And then once it's all settled, then you want to transfer it to a new jar. You would take a funnel like this, clip a coffee filter to it, and then when you pour it in, it'll filter out all the liquid, and what's left in the coffee filter is your pigment. So you take the coffee filter off, you let it dry, and it's like cracked pigment.
Wow.
And then you just grind it like usual. Oops.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's not every liquid can be a successful lake pigment. My friend Sam had this really beautiful wild grape, which was like a vibrant purple and dark blue in ink form, and we both made lake pigment out of it. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
It's really disappointing. It's like a very pale brown. So not every. Yeah, it's so here, let me see. I painted a swatch of it earlier, and I was like, well, that sucks. But it's this brown color right here.
Okay.
So if you saw the original, you'd be like, that's not grape. So it could be one of those things where I just have to adjust the formula of what I'm adding to it, or it just could be that this is not a good lake pigment. But so far, this has been very successful, the one that I just did. And so once that dries, I would just grind it in a mortar and pestle, and then mull it and use it to make paint. The last one I did, I used to make an addition to my watercolor palette. It's right here. This is the Dead Nettle ink.
Great.
Yeah, and they work really well, so I'm very excited. Thank you, Ryan. So just the last thing that I was going to do was just mull some of this Schuylkill Red Ochre pigment.
Yeah.
It's very bright and very fun.
So what is that from? Red ochre.
That's a great question. Most of the ochres are like clay, I think, in origin. And a lot of them are like sandstone particles that stick together. But I found sandstone from Lake Michigan that did not mull very well. The particles just wouldn't break down the way I wanted them to. So it was really like painting with sand. But this one I found is great. If you find rocks, if you happen to be in the Schuylkill River and you find these bright red rocks, you'll know that they're ochre because they're very easy to break in your hands, and you can also write on them like with like sidewalk chalk. So usually if I'm trying to test out like hardness levels of rocks, I'll wet it and like give it a good like streak against a rock, and that's how I can kind of tell what it'll look like.
Cool.
So if it just streaks and it just scratches the rock, then I'll know that I won't ever be able to break it. So there's no point in me bringing it home.
So what is this tool that you have, this glass thing?
So this is a muller. It's used to mull the paint. It kind of looks like a, what is this, like chess piece or checkers or something?
Yeah, a really big
piece. But it's etched glass on the bottom. So if you wanted to do this at home, these are like maybe $100. They're kind of pricey. But you could also use a flat rock. I was using the lid of a Yankee candle for a while. It was like $5 at Marshall's. But the important part is the etched glass part. So it's kind of like this glass surface is scratched up. This glass surface is scratched up. It'll make the pigment adhere to the binder. So the goal isn't to grind more. The goal is to wet all of the pigment. You're just trying to get it as wet as possible with all the binder. So for this one, I thought I would use this binder that I made, which is just gum arabic, which is a kind of tree sap, and it's mixed with honey. So that's what kind of like holds it all together. This is kind of like my use all binder. It kind of makes it very smooth. It's not totally like oil paint. It's not going to like bleed through if you did it on paper. but it makes it like a really fun consistency. So I just take my little eyedropper here. And I made a little hole in the pigment. You can't really see, but it just as like a well, and I missed already. But I'll usually just eyeball it, give it a couple little squirts of the binder. And then I'll mix it with my palette knife. You want to make what's called a slurry. So it's not like sopping wet off of your palette, but that it's thinner than this, so it's easy to kind of mix around. And I'll apologize in advance because the first sounds of this are really annoying. If you want to mute me, I won't judge you. I'm just adding a couple more drops. And then that looks pretty good to go. So this still has like some chunks in the pigment that weren't totally like smashed down by my mortar and pestle. If you buy, you can buy earth pigments. I really like this company called Earth Pigments, but they're really great and they are super smooth and you don't have to grind them in a mortar and pestle at all. So I did this initially starting out because I really wanted a green. This ended up being more of a brown. So, but then you take the molar, you just sort of start in the middle and small circles.
Wow. And that seems to be smoothing out the particles as well.
You can hear the sound change as it's sort of like breaking things down. And I'll kind of stop because it's annoying, but basically what I would do after this, if this was just one color I was making, it would probably take me maybe 10 or 15 minutes, depending. You can mull paint for like as long as 30 minutes, probably more than that if you want it to get really smooth, and probably depending on the binder you were using. But basically I would just go around, scrape this off, scrape it back to the middle, and keep going until it was perfectly smooth and I got all these chunks out. But you can already kind of see like this part right here is pretty smooth.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it's smooth enough to paint a little test swatch. So this, if I wanted this to be thinner, I could always add more of the binder. If I was making oil paint and I used linseed oil, this is when I would add the cold wax if I wanted it to be like a chunky oil paint sort of consistency. But this is not totally mold, so it's going on like a little bit chunky, but you can see the color already and like how pigmented it is.
It's like a reddish color. It's really pretty.
Yeah, so this is, if you spin to that painting, Ryan, this one, that's what this orange color is.
Okay.
So this was mixed with linseed oil and I wanted it to be, I love underpaintings. I like really missed using a good old burnt sienna. So that's what that is. It took a lot of.
It looks like burnt sienna. I think you did a great job duplicating that.
Yeah. The cool thing that I've learned and have sort of like adapted to is I still have all this tubed oil paint. So I've been experimenting with mixing my pigments with the tubed oil paint and seeing what I can come up with.
Wow.
So the other painting on the wall behind me is the same ochre color, and it's mixed with ultramarine violet for a sort of like burnt purple.
Yeah. This is great. This is awesome. I love how you're making all your own pigments. We only have like a few minutes left, so I just want to make sure that people get a chance to ask any questions if they have any. I guess okay, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say, Stephanie, do you know if the process for making like paint, and I guess specifically like kind of grinding it like you were just doing, is similar on a large scale? So like for companies that sell like massive amounts of paint, do they have like a giant like mortar and pestle type thing to like grind it up, or is it different?
So, from my understanding, and I could be wrong depending on companies, I'm certain that they source their pigment from quarries elsewhere. Like everywhere I've seen, even that company that I was talking about that you can buy earth pigments from, it'll say where the pigment comes from, but it's like a quarry in Italy. So to me, that was always like, well, I'd rather just go get it. But they definitely have machinery. Like I've seen the mixing of the paint. Gamblin posts how they mix their paint all the time, which is really cool to watch. So I always think like, oh, my paint would be so smooth if I had a machine to do it. But yeah, I'm sure they source their pigment and then it's all done by machine.
So cool.
Anyone else? I guess I'm wondering, before we wrap up, how did you learn all of this? And if anyone out there wants to make their own pigments, what would you advise them to start out with?
So I did the bulk of my research on Pinterest. There's a lot of crafty bloggers out there. And like I said before, a lot of my knowledge base has come from people who are fabric dyers. So all the talk about mordants, the ideas about where to forage and what to find and what colors you'll get, all came from people who are like dyeing wool. There are people out there that have books and knowledge bases that are how to make paint, how to grind watercolors, but I found them like to be a little lacking personally. Like I would get to a certain point and I'd be like, okay, well now what do I do? Like, what do I mix to make a watercolor? I have this book, I think it's just called Earth Pigments. It's super easy to find. I got it on Amazon, but it kind of breaks down things a little bit better. There's also this book called Wild Color, which is really great. And then there's one called the Wild Color one will give you recipes. So that's really helpful if you're like out and about and you're like, what is this yellow plant? Can I make something from it? Generally, like you'd find like a bunch of recipes for like how to make the best yellows. And then there's another one called Make Ink. He got kind of famous because he was on Martha Stewart's website, I think, and he's in like the New York Times. But he's someone who lives in New York who just kind of makes ink out of everything. So he'll be like, I found cigarette butts, I made ink out of it.
That's cool.
So I didn't find the book super helpful, but it's got like some basic recipes and it's got a lot of like the background to it. So yeah, I just started like absorbing all this knowledge, but Pinterest was my best friend.
Cool. So we have like 2 really quick questions. Number one,
Ryan.
Ryan can ask you at home. No, how many pigments do you think you've made since you started? And when are you coming back to Michigan for more rocks?
Is that from a Fenner? Is that from my parents?
Yeah, it's from a Fenner.
Okay, I'll answer the pigment one first. I would say I've probably made around 20. That's like including failures. I haven't had too many that I've like dumped out or gotten rid of, but I definitely have a whole basket full of rocks under that desk that I don't want to get rid of them. They're so pretty, but they're from Michigan and they're very hard. They're like gabbro and granite and things you build a countertop out of, not make paint out of. But probably 20. I started a fairly new sketchbook when quarantine started. I've been trying to do like recipe pages, just so I'm not good at like keeping track of those things or like measurements like you saw. But so I'm trying to write down if I have something that's successful, where I found it, how I processed it, what I added to it, and keep different swatches of things in there. So that's been kind of helpful. And Mom, I'll come back when the stay-at-home order is lifted. I can't leave.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been really amazing. I've loved seeing your studio and your whole process.
Thank you so much.
You're awesome. And thank you to Ryan as well for doing the camera.
And for all the questions. He never asked me that much about my art.
And thanks to everyone for coming. I'm going to repost your website and your Instagram. So if you want to get in touch with Stephanie with any more questions, you can find her online. And thanks for coming tonight, everyone.
Thank you.
That was a really
Stephanie, that was awesome.
Ah,
Yeah, that
thank
was
you so
great.
much. I miss you all.